What if I told you that the thing you've been chasing, the dream job, the perfect body, the admiration of others, isn't actually what you want? I mean, it feels like what you want. It feels like if you could just get there, then you'd finally be able to exhale. But here's the thing. I've spent years researching what actually makes people feel whole, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, what we're really after isn't the achievement itself. It's what we think it will give us. I learned this the hard way. I once thought that if I could just prove myself, become an expert, be seen as successful, then I'd feel worthy. And I see this everywhere. We tie our self-worth to external things, a number on the scale, a title on a business card, the approval of people who, let's be honest, we don't even like that much. And yet, no matter how much we achieve, that quiet, nagging feeling of not enough never really goes away. Why? Because we're solving the wrong problem. We all have a story we tell ourselves about what will finally make us happy. Maybe for you, it's getting the dream job. Maybe it's finding the right partner, making more money, or finally hitting your goal weight. For me, for a long time, it was success. I used to believe that if I could just achieve enough, if I worked hard, got recognized, built something impressive, then I'd finally feel worthy. I'd finally feel like I was enough. But here's the hard truth. We are chasing the wrong things. Not because success, love, or financial stability aren't good things to want. They absolutely are. But because we think they will give us something they can't. I used to think that if I could just get that one big achievement, it would silence the nagging voice in my head that told me I wasn't enough, that I had to prove myself, that I had to earn my worth. But achievement never did that. Because every time I reached a goal, there was always another one waiting. That's the thing about external validation. It always moves the goalpost. And I know I'm not alone in this. I've heard this story over and over again from people at every stage of life. The CEO who built a multi-million-dollar business and still feels like a fraud. The actor who finally lands a lead role and is already terrified of losing relevance. The person who spent years trying to lose weight, thinking it would bring confidence, only to realize that insecurity doesn't disappear just because the scale changes. What we're actually searching for isn't success, fame, or approval. It's love. It's belonging. It's the feeling of being enough just as we are. But we've been conditioned to believe that those things have to be earned. That if we just work a little harder, do a little more, become a little better, then we'll finally be worthy. We see this pattern everywhere. Research shows that people who win the lottery experience a temporary spike in happiness, but within a year, they return to their previous emotional baseline. Olympic athletes who win silver medals are often less happy than those who win bronze, because instead of celebrating what they achieved, they're focused on what they almost had. The arrival fallacy is real. The belief that once we get there, wherever there is, we'll finally feel complete. But there keeps shifting. I've had the privilege of working with people at the end of their lives, people in their 70s, 80s, even over 100 years old. And let me tell you, none of them talk about their net worth. None of them say, I wish I had worked harder so I could have bought a bigger house. What they talk about is love, relationships, the moments they felt deeply connected, the people they wish they had spent more time with, and sometimes the regret of realizing too late that the things they were chasing didn't actually matter. And yet we live in a culture that keeps telling us the opposite, that if we just hustle harder, look better, achieve more, then we'll finally feel at peace. But peace isn't something you find at the top of the mountain. If you don't know how to rest in who you are now, you won't suddenly learn how to do it once you've made it. So here's the real question. What if you stopped waiting? What if you stopped chasing? What if you gave yourself permission to feel worthy and enough right now, exactly as you are? Because that's the truth that took me years to understand. The things we think we need from the world are things we can give ourselves. Validation, acceptance, love. You don't need to achieve more to deserve them. You don't need to be different. You just have to stop believing the lie that worthiness is something you have to earn. And once you do that, once you realize that you are already enough, everything changes. Because you stop chasing and start living. You stop waiting for happiness and start choosing it. You stop looking outside for permission to love yourself and finally give it to yourself. And that is real freedom. I used to believe that if I just figured out the right path, if I made the right choices, worked hard enough, did everything I was supposed to do, then life would feel certain, secure, like I could finally exhale and trust that everything was going to be okay. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. Certainty is an illusion. Control is an illusion. And the more we cling to them, the more exhausted and anxious we become. I've seen this over and over in my research, in my own life, in conversations with people who have spent decades chasing a version of security that doesn't actually exist. The person who stays in a job they hate because at least it's stable. The person who stays in a relationship that's slowly breaking them down because the unknown feels scarier than being unhappy. The person who won't take a risk on their dream. Because failure isn't just failure, it's proof that they were never good enough to begin with. We crave certainty because we're wired for survival. Our brains don't like the unknown. And so we try to build our lives around the illusion of control. We think if I just do everything right, nothing bad will happen. But life doesn't work that way. Because no matter how much we plan, no matter how carefully we try to control things, uncertainty is always there. And what I've found, what I've lived, is that the more we try to resist uncertainty, the more power it has over us. The more we let it keep us stuck. I once interviewed a man who told me he spent his entire life making choices based on safety, always taking the surest route, the most practical job, the path with the least risk. And then at 60 years old, he lost everything in a way he never saw coming. And he told me something I'll never forget. I spent my whole life avoiding fear, and it still found me. That hit me hard. Because that's the lie we tell ourselves, right? That if we just make the right choices, we can avoid pain. But uncertainty isn't something we can outrun. And if we build our lives around avoiding it, we don't actually feel safe. We just feel small. I used to think courage was about being fearless. But I've learned that courage is actually about being willing to feel fear. It's about making peace with uncertainty instead of letting it control us. Because the truth is, uncertainty isn't just where fear lives, it's also where possibility lives. It's where growth happens. It's where the best things in our lives begin. I've seen this in my own life in ways that still make me shake my head. Some of the greatest moments of my life, the most meaningful relationships, the biggest opportunities, the things that changed me in ways I could have never imagined, only happened because I was willing to step into uncertainty. And was it terrifying? Absolutely. Did I try to convince myself 1,000 times that maybe I should just stay where I was? Of course. But what I've learned is this: the discomfort of uncertainty is temporary. The regret of playing small is not. We can spend our whole lives waiting for certainty, for the perfect moment, for the guarantee that things will work out. But life doesn't give us guarantees. And if we wait until we're ready, we'll be waiting forever. So the real question is, what would you do if you weren't waiting for certainty? What would you choose if you weren't waiting for permission? Because at some point we have to stop asking, what if it goes wrong? And start asking, what if this is the thing that changes everything? And maybe, just maybe, the only thing standing between us and the life we want is our willingness to step into the unknown. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself over and over again, then I'd finally feel worthy, that I'd reach some magical point where I could say, okay, I'm enough now. But what I didn't realize was that I was caught in a cycle that had no finish line. Because here's the thing about self-worth. When we tie it to achievement, we never actually get to feel it. No matter how much we accomplish, there's always another goal, another milestone, another reason we still haven't earned the right to rest, to breathe, to believe we're enough. I've seen this in so many people. People who are exhausted, burned out, running on empty, but still afraid to slow down, because slowing down feels like falling behind, because rest feels like laziness, because deep down we've been taught that worth has to be earned. And when I say taught, I mean it literally. From the time we're kids, we get messages about what makes us valuable. Good grades mean we're smart. Praise means we're good. Winning means we're special. And before we know it, our sense of worth isn't something we carry inside us, it's something we chase. But the problem with chasing worth is that it's always just out of reach. No matter how much we do, it never feels like enough. And that's because we've built our value on something that can be taken away. I remember interviewing a woman who had spent her whole life proving herself. She had the degrees, the career, the accolades, everything that was supposed to make her feel successful. And she told me, I thought that when I got here, I'd finally feel like I was enough. But instead, I just feel tired. That stayed with me because I know that feeling, the feeling of working so hard for something, only to realize that the thing you were searching for was never going to be found in an achievement. And that's when I started asking different questions. Instead of what do I need to do to prove I'm enough, I started asking, what if I already am? That question changes everything, because if we don't have to prove our worth, if we don't have to hustle for it, then we can start making choices based on what actually matters. I see this shift happen in people who have spent years tying their value to achievement. When they finally stop and ask themselves, what do I actually want? Sometimes they realize that they don't even know, because they've spent so long trying to be what they thought they were supposed to be. And listen, I'm not saying that ambition is bad. I love big goals. I love meaningful work. But the difference between chasing achievement to prove our worth and pursuing something because it truly matters to us, that difference is everything. Because when we believe we are already enough, we get to create from a place of freedom instead of fear. We get to take risks, not because we're trying to earn our value, but because we know we're already valuable. We get to rest without guilt because we know that who we are matters more than what we produce. And that is a life-changing shift. Because if worth isn't something we have to earn, then maybe, just maybe, we've been enough all along. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, planned well enough, and controlled every possible outcome, I could avoid failure. I thought if I were careful, really careful, I could sidestep disappointment, heartbreak, or that crushing feeling of falling short. But what I've learned after years of research and personal reckoning is that no amount of control can protect us from failure. And more than that, failure isn't actually the thing we need to fear. I've sat across from hundreds of people who have told me their stories of failure, the business that collapsed, the relationship that ended, the dream that didn't pan out. And every single time I ask them the same question, what happened next? Because that's where the real story is, not in the fall, but in the getting back up. One of the most damaging lies we tell ourselves is that failure is proof that we weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. But failure isn't proof of anything except that we showed up, that we tried, that we were in the arena. And when we step into the arena, when we dare to do something that matters, failure isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Now, I know that's not the most comforting thing to hear. Most of us would prefer a roadmap for how to succeed without ever stumbling. But I've never met a wholehearted person who hasn't faced failure head on. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. I once spoke to a woman who had poured years of her life into starting a nonprofit, only to watch it struggle and eventually close. She told me, I don't even know who I am without this work. She had built her identity around her success, so when things fell apart, she felt like she had fallen apart. And that's what failure does when we attach it to our worth. It doesn't just feel like a loss, it feels like we are the loss. That's why so many of us avoid risks, avoid change, avoid putting ourselves out there. Because we don't just fear failing, we fear what failing will say about us. But here's what I know. Failure is never the end of the story. The real question is, what do we do with it? Do we let it define us, or do we let it teach us? Do we use it as evidence that we should stop trying, or do we use it as fuel to get back up, to get stronger, to get clearer on what truly matters? I've seen people take their biggest failures and turn them into the foundation for something even stronger. The woman who thought she'd lost everything, she realized that her worth wasn't in the success of the nonprofit, it was in the why behind it. And when she let go of the shame of failure, she found new ways to keep making an impact, ways that felt even more aligned with who she was becoming. I think sometimes we believe that success and failure are opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're not. They are part of the same process. The most resilient, creative, and courageous people aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who embrace it, learn from it, and refuse to let it be the thing that stops them. And the truth is, the only way to never fail is to never try, to stay small, to play safe. But that's not why we're here. We are here to risk, to grow, to put our hearts into things that matter. And if we do that, if we really truly show up, then failure isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. Because it means we were brave enough to try. I used to believe that clarity was something you waited for. That if you were patient enough, thoughtful enough, or maybe just lucky enough, one day you'd wake up and know exactly what to do. But the truth is, clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from doing. From stepping forward even when the path isn't clear, even when you're scared out of your mind, even when you don't feel ready. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who feel stuck because they don't have it all figured out yet. They're waiting for certainty before they take the leap. They tell me, I don't want to make the wrong choice. What if I pick the wrong job, the wrong relationship, the wrong dream? And I get it. We live in a culture that tells us we should always have a 5-year plan, that every move should be strategic, that we should only take risks when we're sure we'll succeed. But the people who live the fullest, most meaningful lives don't have some secret map that guarantees they're making the perfect choice every time. What they have is the willingness to move forward without perfect clarity. I once spoke with a man who had spent years in a job that drained him. Every Sunday night, the dread would creep in, and by Monday morning, he felt like he was dragging himself through a life that didn't feel like his own. But when I asked him what he wanted to do, he said, I have no idea. If I knew, I'd go do it. And that's where so many of us get stuck. We think we need to know the whole picture before we take the first step. But clarity doesn't happen all at once. It happens in motion. The only way we figure out what we want is by trying things, by making choices, by taking risks, by paying attention to what energizes us and what depletes us. But that means being willing to start before we feel ready. It means being willing to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to start anyway. And yes, that's terrifying, because when you step forward without certainty, you open yourself up to failure, to detours, to moments where you think, what was I even thinking? But you also open yourself up to discovery, to possibility, to the kind of growth that only happens when you take action. I've learned that we don't find clarity by overthinking, by researching every possible scenario, or by waiting until we feel absolutely certain. We find it by paying attention to our lives, by noticing the things that make us feel alive, by listening to that quiet voice inside us that says, this matters. And sometimes clarity comes in whispers, a small tug in your gut when you're doing something that lights you up, a moment of peace in the middle of the chaos that tells you this is the right direction. And sometimes it comes in the form of discomfort, feeling drained, resentful, or like you're constantly fighting against yourself. That's clarity too. That's your body, your heart, your intuition saying, something isn't right here. But we have to be brave enough to listen. So if you're waiting for certainty before you take the next step, I have to tell you, clarity doesn't work that way. It's something we build. piece by piece as we move forward. And the most courageous thing we can do is trust that we don't have to have it all figured out to begin. We just have to begin. Here's what I know for sure. The life you want, the one that feels real and meaningful, isn't waiting for you on the other side of certainty. It's built in the messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes terrifying process of showing up, of choosing courage over comfort, of stepping forward even when you're unsure. There is no perfect timing, no flawless plan, no guarantee that you won't stumble. But that's not the goal. The goal is to live fully, to try, to fail, to learn, and to keep moving toward what sets your soul on fire. So if you've been waiting for clarity, for confidence, for permission, consider this your sign. You are ready enough. You are brave enough. You don't need to know exactly where you're going. You just need to take the next step. And then another, and another. You've got this. And I can't wait to see where your courage takes you. Good luck.